To put it bluntly, I would rather send bullets to Ukraine than American boys.
I guess you have to wonder what happens behind closed doors. Is it an intel community thing where they muscle their way into these people's minds?
Speaker Mike Johnson started the week with a vote of no confidence from parts of his caucus, and he went ahead and took a bill to the floor having to do with funding Ukraine, funding Israel, and funding defense for Taiwan, without bringing anything to the floor about border security. This is in direct opposition to what he promised when he became speaker. When asked about this, he spoke pretty strongly about what he's decided about Ukraine. Here he is earlier this week.
I'm doing here what I believe to be the right thing. I think providing lethal aid to Ukraine right now is critically important. I really do. I really do believe the intel and the briefings that we've gotten that I believe Xi and Vladimir Putin and Iran really are an axis of evil. I think they're in coordination on this. I think that Vladimir Putin would continue to march through Europe if he were allowed. I think he might go to the Balkans next. I think he might have a showdown with Poland or one of our NATO allies. To put it bluntly, I would rather send bullets to Ukraine than American boys.
Chris DeGaulle, let's start with you here, Chris, because we've seen this story over and over again. It was pretty clear that Speaker Johnson promised that he would not bring any of these bills to the floor unless border security was dealt with first. So what happened here?
I asked that question rhetorically on the show this week. I said, what happens to these guys when they ascend to power? I told my audience when Mike Johnson became speaker, I said, listen, guys, I don't know. It could be a big ruse, but everything on paper says he's a conservative. He's one of us, Freedom Caucus guy. Let's give him a shot. And then lo and behold, he turns into anybody else we've ever seen in that position. And I guess you have to wonder what happens behind closed doors. Is it an intel community thing where they muscle their way into these people's minds? I guess he's a sincerely held beliefs guy, but I have two stories in front of me today from Axios. Democrats' case for saving Mike Johnson, and House Democrats take unprecedented step to save Mike Johnson's foreign aid package. So that's all I need to know. He and Democrats seem to be working together more so than his own party, and that's a sign of bad things to come. That's a harbinger of things to come to me.
And Andy, the way this conversation seems to go for some reason is if you say, listen, let's focus on our border first, then maybe we can fund Ukraine, then we can do these other things. Suddenly you're, on Putin's side, or you're on the Iranian side or Hamas's side. Is it difficult for people to understand here why they can't just say, sure, we'll fund Ukraine. Let's have that conversation. Let's have the vote. But let's make the border the priority. That's what we're not understanding.
Exactly. And, from an AMAC perspective, our members are extremely concerned about immigration and the border. And I think they could probably tolerate anything as long as our border is shored up. They're extremely concerned about the fentanyl and everything that's flowing across the border. They're extremely concerned about these illegal immigrants that are sopping up all of our services in hospitals and in schools. And I really think, and we've polled our members on this issue before, they're a forgiving bunch, and they realize that the speaker's in a tough position. They realize that he's a man of faith. They're realizing that he's dealing with a complex structure of the House. But in the mind of an AMAG member, it starts and ends with border security. So it's tough for them to swallow when the speaker says one thing and then does another.
Kurt, this is also, by the way, in the middle of a presidential election year where I would think it's important for Republicans to sort of communicate what their priorities are, what they stand for, and what differentiates themselves from Democrats. This has all of the makings of being able to be a winner for Republicans.
Oh, look, I don't know any hardcore Republicans for whom the borscht guzzling Slavs are a priority over the border. Look, I like the Ukrainians. I trained them 4 times. I served with them overseas. They're in the right. I would like them to beat the Russians. I would also like a pony. There simply aren't enough Ukrainians. And this is, putting aside the whole, I told you X, but I'm going to do Y. I don't know what the outcome is here. What does Speaker Johnson expect to achieve at the end of this paying for a bunch of Ukrainian pensions? Because it's not just lethal aid. It's pensions and social programs and all sorts of crap. What is the end state this money will achieve? And of course, the answer is, shut up, you love Putin, you're probably also a transphobe.
Well, I'll tell you, Majority Leader Steve Scalise appeared on Salem News Channel's weekly show this week on the Hill. And when asked about this and about the conflict right now within the Republican caucus, he spun the question right back to, hey, we can all agree on supporting Israel, can't we?
There's some tough issues. There's some issues where we're divided, but most of the issues were very, very united. You know, look, this past week, we had a whole host of bills that I brought to the floor for our members to vote on that dealt with not only standing with Israel, but standing up to Iran, putting sanctions on Iran and all of their proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, who are shooting and firing weapons at our men and women in uniform. This is an example of where if the president's not going to lead, Congress is leading. And we saw overwhelming votes, and it was very uniting for Republicans. But we even pulled in a number of Democrats.
Andy, it's true. Most Americans do unite behind Israel, and it isn't something that the Biden administration has been clear on. But is it enough to just sort of change the subject and say, never mind our promises about the border, we got to rally behind Israel? We want to rally behind Israel, 100%, but we can't forget the border. I don't know what they're trying to accomplish here.
It seems to be a lot of deflection going on here. I hope that they realize how bad these optics are among the GOP on Capitol Hill and what it looks like to the rest of the country, how just discombobulated they've been. With regard to Israel, you know, of course, Israel is our biggest ally in the Middle East, the largest democracy there, and they need to be defended. But in the same breath, we're the last best hope of freedom on the face of the planet. Why can't we secure our border? How hard can that be? And why can't we do both?
And Chris, I mean, you're in the middle of the country there. I think that you reflect Midwestern values and some votes that both Republicans and Democrats are going to be vying for this November. It's a political winner, isn't it? That's what I'm not understanding. Where's the loser in all of this for Republicans to die on the hill of border security?
Well, and you know, Pennsylvania's John Fetterman. I mean, this is a guy who lately has sounded more like a populist. He, for heaven's sakes, has been one of the toughest on the border, saying the population of Pittsburgh is pouring across just about every month. So even he's calling an alarm about this. You know, supporting Israel is easier to me and clearer because, number one, they've got the stuff to get it done. I mean, we can all agree supporting Israel is easier because Israel can actually, if you let them, take it to Iran and secure victory on their own. There is no clear objective, as Kurt said, in Ukraine. So endlessly handing them money. I talked to Missouri Senator Eric Schmidt recently. He said, I've been in this town, Washington, D.C., 17 months. And Chris, there's this bizarre obsession of everyone to keep sending money to Ukraine. And I genuinely don't understand it. That's what he told me.
Yeah.
And yet something as easy to understand as the border seems difficult to get to. Doesn't make sense.
Kurt, you're a retired Army colonel, and both Scalise and Speaker Johnson have raised the specter of, well, if Putin moves on a NATO country, then we have to commit our troops, so better to commit money. I understand the logic of that argument, but it seems kind of blackmail-y to me.
Well, it's also stupid. First of all, let me touch base on Israel. There was no promise to add border security to Israel, and the Republicans are not divided about Israel. Republicans are divided about Ukraine. So here, see, in a negotiation, you give something to get something. And Speaker Johnson doesn't seem to understand that. Now, you know very well I have a very nice car. That's because I don't give away the store every time I negotiate. So people hire me again. A problem I don't think Mike Johnson's going to have if, through some miracle, we manage to hold on to the House next year. As for invading Western Europe, that triggers Article 5, that triggers NATO, that triggers an American response. Putin is having enough trouble dealing with the Ukrainians. He thinks he's going to take on the combined forces of NATO. I find that hard to believe. And again, I was a guy who was in the Cold War. I was in Stuttgart waiting for the Russian hordes to come. So I kind of understand the situation, and I'm not buying it.
Kurt, you raised the specter as to whether Mike Johnson keeps the gavel here. There is the motion to vacate, but it's not being acted upon yet. Tom Massey or Marjorie Taylor Greene can call it at any time. Let's go around the horn here. And again, I want to preface this by saying I like Congressman Johnson. I'm not so sure about Speaker Johnson at this time, but I do like Congressman Johnson. I wish the two weren't so different. Do you think he survives through Election Day, Kurt?
Probably, I give it like a 60% chance, only because another speaker fight would be so disruptive. I'd like to throw out a big thank you to Matt Gaetz right now for putting us in this position. I have a lot of problems with McCarthy, but McCarthy's not dumb enough to get into this exact situation. So great job, Matt Gaetz, and the rest of you knuckleheads for throwing him out.
I always worry about whether Kurt's going to really share his opinion about how he really feels about these things with
Oh,
us.
if you want me to talk about Matt Gaetz, we're going to need to go off FCC compliance.
Andy, what do you think? Does Johnson keep the gavel through the year?
I'm going to agree with Kurt because I think that who else would want this job based on what's going on in recent months? We polled our members on this, and they were extremely evenly divided in opposing the removal of McCarthy or supporting the removal of McCarthy. But anymore, this is one of the toughest jobs on the face of the planet. And are they going to find somebody in the GOP and Congress that would even want to do it?
Chris?
Yeah, the problem, I agree. I don't think he'll go anywhere. But the problem is I keep hearing Republicans say, we got to govern. We can't get anything done. And I don't feel like most conservatives are in the mood for them to do much of anything. I think we're just fine that they're not doing much. So Mike Johnson being there or not being there, I mean, yes, I'd like a secure border, but they seem to be doing everything else but. So Congress doing nothing, quite frankly, makes me happy.